Assalamu alaikum everyone. Let's begin. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Assalatu wassalamu ala Muhammadin wa alihi sayyidin wa sallam. Ishrah li sadri wa yassir li amri. Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to our second session on the essentials of positive parenting. And as mentioned last time, this is interactive in so much as parents can type their questions in the chat box, and I will try my best to answer them during this hour. But please try to keep the questions related to what we are talking about, and obviously you can also email me relevant questions. We have to email the packages. Let's begin. Just a brief review from what we did last time. Basically, this is a course talking about positive parenting, and we began by talking about our parenting styles because there are a few different parenting styles, as we mentioned, and the impact of the various styles on children. And what we showed was that authoritative parenting is the most effective style for bringing up children who are in line with our Islamic values, as well as who are adjusted and successful in this way. And basically what authoritative parenting is that you have high expectations for children's behavior, so extremely responsive to their needs. So it's both and the three words that we will continue to use throughout. I'm not sure if we mentioned them last time, but the three key words to remember for this series is positive, firm, and consistent. So again, being positive does not mean that we are lax in discipline or that we do not have a high expectation for children. It means that we have high expectations of children, but we are also proactive in gearing our children up for success. It also means that we take a lot of responsibility as parents for managing our own selves. And as we go through the weeks, inshallah, we will be continuing to talk about the importance of that. We also discussed some key aspects of positive parenting last time, which meant also encouraging positive behavior through praise. And we talked about descriptive praise. And we also mentioned that a few of the other aspects of positive parenting was to use assertive discipline and to manage undesirable behavior, and also to build strong relationships with our children. And lastly, to look after ourselves as parents and to manage our lives. So this week, inshallah, we will be focusing on managing undesirable behavior, because I think this tends to be the main reason why a lot of parents attend parenting courses, is to figure out what to do when children misbehave, or how to manage children's behavior, the discipline aspect. So today, inshallah, we will begin by talking about discipline versus punishment. What are the differences and why one may be more effective than the other. We will spend a little bit of time trying to understand misbehavior, why children misbehave, and obviously this is not an exact science, in the sense that hopefully we will just get an idea of what could be going on for the child. And because obviously, depending on why the child is misbehaving, it would make sense that we use different strategies. And then the most of the time today, inshallah, we hope to spend on disciplining strategies. And the 4 strategies that we will specifically mention and discuss today, inshallah, are first, family meetings; second, natural and logical consequences; the third is time out; and the fourth is a process for encouraging cooperation. So let me just go on to the next slide, and then we will just pause for a breather to reflect on this. So again, the idea is that we begin by setting an intention and to do a little bit of self-reflection about what does discipline mean to me. When I'm talking about disciplining my children, what am I exactly talking about? And why do I want to do it? What is my goal in disciplining? And lastly, are my current methods of discipline effective in shaping behavior and in moving my children towards self-discipline and self-reliance? Because remember, we said last time as well that our goal is basically, we may be unconscious about it, but for many parents, the goal is obviously that children should be self-motivated and they would behave appropriately whether or not we are around. Because as we know, as children grow in age, we have less and less control over them and they spend more and more time away from us. So the ideal would be that they would internalize good behavior and that they would be able to behave in an appropriate manner even when we are not around. So I'm just going to pause here for a second, and this would be a good time to get some feedback about whether tried different things over the last week. Did you notice anything? Did something stand out to you? And also feel free to reflect on the questions which are up on the screen. So did anyone try descriptive praise, which was the main technique or strategy that we used last time? You notice that when you talk in a low voice, she responds well. Right? You managed it for one day. It was hard to maintain because again, when we're learning a new skill, it is challenging. So and that's a good thing to actually keep in mind for our children as well. To be patient with them, because when we are trying to train them in appropriate skills and behaviors, when we're trying to guide them in a way, that it does take a while and it is easy to slip and training takes time. So you managed it for one full day. I think that's great. And the idea is that, keep going back to it, because obviously if we do it one day and we give up for another week, the more consistent we are in anything, the more likely the good effects of it are going to be. So you explained to your 9-year-old about this course and why I was trying to change things. Okay, that's great, because I think it's really great to be upfront with our children. Sometimes we think that, we need to learn all these strategies in secret and try them out. But I've always found that if you are really upfront about the fact that you want to be really good at this and that you're learning as well, it's actually a great role modeling to do with it. You tried the praise, but it was hard to use the word. So again, it is challenging in the beginning, and the more you do it, it does get easier. And basically, the skill is simply to keep describing what you're noticing. So, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter if you slip up on the words or you don't know what to say. I think the key here is to try and recognize that you're not going to get it perfectly, right? But the more you do it, the better you will be at it. You found it helped you focus on the positive that was happening through the day. Okay, that's wonderful. That's really a good point, because it actually does do that. When not only does it do that, but what we focus on is what we're going to get. So the more we focus on the positive behaviors and we verbalize them, the more they're going to increase. And that's the whole point of, trying it, even if you don't do it perfectly. Every time I praised, I tried to make it descriptive, but sometimes it was very hard, and I'd come out with common phrase, and that's quite okay. That is a common experience, and um, it's not the end of the world. If you say good boy or good girl or that was wonderful, that's really, the point is again to become more intentional about what we're doing. And if that's all we're doing in praise, then, it's what we call junk praise. But obviously, all of us use all different kinds of things, and all of us have days when we're at our best as parents, and we have really bad days. And inshallah, in the final week, we will talk a lot more about, being kind to ourselves as well, because I think that's a very important part of parenting. Trying to discuss more things with her and explain why I'm asking her to do things. She was very supportive. Good. I'm glad that worked out. When my daughters break a rule or do mischief, I give them some space and discuss about it at a later time so that they feel less embarrassed. It helps focus more on the issue and handling the guilt. We are going to be talking about discipline today, inshallah. So hopefully, we can discuss that again. That it definitely motivated your son to try and do more things to please me. Great. That is a very, very common effect of positive or descriptive praise. Have to keep reminding myself that it's easy to sit back to your natural habits. Exactly. And that, again, the idea is that when we recognize that in ourselves, we will be more patient with our children, because for them too, it is easy with that. So it was more positive behavior. Wonderful. So more positive behavior was happening without specific request. Okay, wonderful. I'm really glad, that parents are actually taking on the challenge and actually practicing the skills, because again, you know, this course will be really effective if we actually practice in between sessions, right? Again, parenting is something which is like learning on the job. We may know all the theories, but unless we actually put them into practice, they may not be very. So let's begin now, inshallah, to talk about what is the difference between discipline and punishment. So again, I'd like people to just start thinking about the differences, what they mean to them, while we talk about this. So again, punishment is generally thought of as imposing an external control by force on children to change their behavior. So, and it includes inflicting pain such as spanking, slapping, hitting, imposing suffering, which means withholding food, or enforcing penalties that are not related to the unacceptable behavior, such as if the child makes a mess, punishment would be to impose something on them which was not related to making a mess or spilling milk, right? And obviously, it also includes personal or emotional attacks like name calling, ridicule, insults, screaming, all those undesirable behaviors. And we do need to acknowledge that many forms of punishment are against the law. We, especially when we live in the West, sometimes if we have come from a background where parents are to be obeyed a lot, without question, then we may not recognize that children growing up in the West have a lot of rights, and very soon they actually become aware of these rights. And if we don't shape up, things may go really badly wrong in terms of child protection being involved, because you know that especially for a child, at least in Canada, for a child under the age of 16, if there is a risk of abuse or neglect, whether they're teachers or social workers or anyone who sees a child being physically or inappropriately punished, they actually have to report. So we do need to be cognizant of that. So what is the problem with punishment anyway? First of all, it's adult oriented. It's very much comes from anger of the parent rather than a clear intention of managing behavior. It imposes power from outside, so it's not teaching the child internal discipline. It is definitely something which is from outside. It arouses anger and resentment in the child. It invites more conflict. Again, if for most people who continue to punish a child, it's very rare that it would result in the kinds of things that we want to see in children. It's preoccupied with blame, obviously, and it doesn't look for solutions. So again, if a child drops some milk and they're grounded, or TV privileges are taken away, it's really not addressing the issue. It's unrelated to the crime. And obviously, quite importantly, it demonstrates a parent's ability to control a child. And the reason why that may be problematic is, again, children who are physically disciplined. I mean, I haven't got too much. We're not going to deal too much with, the studies and the research there, just because there is a lot to cover today. So I had to make a decision of, what to include or not. But again, there is quite a bit out there on the long-term effects of physical and violence and violence punishment on children. You punish a lot, yes, and the idea, the reason why I specifically named them was so that we recognize what we're doing and hopefully make different choices. If you can convince the child that this kind of behavior is wrong and not acceptable, they themselves will learn to refrain from it. Not always. That is the point that yes, the idea is that the child should make good decisions, but often children need to learn that, and they are. It's a process for them, so it may not happen immediately. So why do we use punishment in any case? Well, the main reason is that often it is the most efficient, I will not say effective, but efficient way to stop misbehavior. In other words, it may stop the misbehavior in the short term. Right? Children may show remorse during punishment. So obviously, if a child is being grounded for a week for something that he did, they're likely to not repeat it in the short term, and they're likely to say sorry, or they're likely to do what it takes for the parent to soften up. The parent gets to blow up steam, definitely. So again, this is a very important point, that when we are, using punishment, that are we doing it out of anger, or are we doing it for the child's benefit? And the thinking step, a form of punishment. Again, we are going to be talking about timeout. So again, that would be a form of timeout, and we have a whole section on that. So we will be discussing that in a little bit of time, so just hang on. The parent feels in control. Obviously, parenting can really turn into a power struggle, because unconsciously, when children are not doing what we consider to be appropriate behavior, we can easily fall into the "you better obey or else," right? So again, in the short term, the parent feels that they're in control, that they haven't let the children get away with it. And again, the parent may have been raised that way, so they are unconsciously doing exactly what was done to them. If they were used bad language on, or they were slapped or spanked or whatever. And many parents who do that turn out to be obedient, quote unquote, right? So the parent may think that, listen, it worked for me, and that's how I'm going to raise my child. So the punishment definitely has some immediate rewards, but they are offset by long-term disadvantages. What are some of the impacts of punishment on children? Well, the first is that obviously for the child to behave, they need to have either ourselves or another authority figure present. It also can teach children to lie and sneak around behind our back to avoid punishment. In other words, they are motivated to behave appropriately when someone is watching. It teaches children what not to do, but not what to do. And it inhibits rather than promotes the learning process. Because if we think of punishment as instilling shame in the child, again, we won't go into that, but basically there's a lot of learning research out there which says that all learning is state dependent. In other words, learning is tied to emotions. If emotions are positive, learning is easier. So it inhibits the learning process of positive behavior. It can actually encourage undesirable behavior because, as you will see, sometimes the goal of misbehavior is simply to get the parent's attention. So if the parent is responding, because remember, for a child, any attention is better than no attention. So if the child only gets the parent's attention when they are misbehaving, they are likely to continue to misbehave even if they are punished. That's a really important thing. Also, as the child grows, it can obviously escalate into more violence. This can happen extremely easily. That when the child becomes a teenager, and if they have not learned to manage themselves, if only punishment has been used as a way to manage behavior, it can obviously as the child becomes stronger, it becomes harder for the parents to physically control them, and it will lead to an escalation of violence. So again, it may lead the child themselves to use force to solve disagreements, and it can also lead to revenge-seeking behavior in children. Now, we all do it at times. Again, the idea is not what we do sometimes. The idea is that we need to become better at what we do most of the time. So again, we need to recognize that there will be times when we slip, but there should be definitely strong boundaries in terms of how we speak to children, and especially physical. If we get angry once, then we raise our voice and say, "Go to your room." That again, the less we do that, obviously, the better. But you cannot compare that to, say, for example, using physical discipline on a regular basis or physical punishment on a regular basis. Now, discipline, on the other hand, so do I think all punishment is bad? I think once we talk about discipline, that answer will become clearer, that discipline is definitely necessary. And the way we've defined punishment, by its very definition, it's something which is undesirable, in the sense because it's not coming out of a desire to control the child, it's coming out of our own inability to manage ourselves, and it's actually not related to what the child is doing again. So I think, once we talk about discipline, that hopefully will become a little bit clearer. Discipline, on the other hand, is defined as training to develop children's behavior through instruction and practice, and especially to teach self-control. So, the paradigm is different. For example, punishment is always after the fact. So the child slips up and you impose the punishment, which may not be related to where the child has slipped up. Discipline, on the other hand, is something which is much more proactive. So discipline starts way before the child has done anything wrong. I hope that makes some sense. So again, the paradigm of discipline, the foundation of it is training. It is not arbitrary or confusing or coercive to the child. It's not something that we do to the children. It is restorative and invites reconciliation. What does that mean? So again, discipline means, restorative means that when the child slips, they are encouraged and expected to make good. They are expected to, for example, if the child, let's use the example we used earlier, which was if the child slips, um, spills milk, for example. Punishment would be, you're grounded, you can't watch TV or you can't go out to play. Again, not related to the crime, and it will not give the child specific instructions on how to make better. Discipline, on the other hand, would say you spilled the milk, you need to clean it up, and we need to discuss how, if it's a regular habit, we need to discuss, how you need to sit or what you need to be trained in so that it doesn't happen all the time. So again, the goal is to instruct and to guide our children and help the children develop self-discipline, which is an ordering of the self from the inside and not an imposition from the outside. But again, the criteria for discipline should be that shows the children what they have done and what to do instead. So again, when the child drops milk, you explain to them that why it's not good, for many reasons. We shouldn't waste food. We need to be careful of how we eat, and it makes a mess. And what to do instead means how to sit, how to hold the glass, so that it doesn't happen again. And gives them as much ownership of the problem as they can handle, which enhances self-esteem. So again, by showing them how they could in future avoid spilling the milk, it puts the onus on them to learn a life skill which will help them. And it helps them, give them option to solving the problem. So for example, would you like to use the sponge or the towel to mop up the milk? And leaves their dignity intact, which is extremely important. So again, in discipline, in punishment, often the child is shamed and the child is made to feel bad about themselves. Whereas for discipline, it has no impact on their dignity. In other words, they know that they have slipped, but they also know how to make amends and how to do better the next time. And it promotes growth in the 5 areas of development, which is physical, intellectual, social, emotional, and moral. In other words, slowly, with practice, you should, with the process of discipline, we should be able to see appropriate growth in these areas. Now, very importantly, again, I think when parents mention, is all punishment bad? I think, the question may be that, what if the child does something wrong? Can there be any consequences for it? So definitely, there are consequences for inappropriate behavior in discipline as well. The difference is that the consequences must be reasonable and relevant. They have to be relevant to what has happened. They need to be simple, valuable, and practical, right? RSVP. Now let's look at, before we move on to consequences, it might be helpful to actually try and understand why children misbehave and prevent, uncooperative behavior. So can people share, why do you think children misbehave? I know sometimes as parents, we think they're doing it just to spite us, right? Especially when we're having a really bad day, we may actually believe that they're doing it just to get back. So to get attention, and many people say that they might be bored, tired, hungry. They don't realize they're doing something bad. They're distracted by something more interesting. Okay. So again, these are, you know, definitely reasons why they misbehave. And again, the idea is that if, we need to understand a little bit why the child is misbehaving, because if we don't, say, for example, many people said to get attention, right? Now, if the child is misbehaving to get attention and we give them a lot of attention while they are misbehaving, by, arguing with them or nagging them or lecturing them, guess what? The misbehavior will definitely increase because it's meeting the child's needs. So that needs are not being met, quality time, hunger, wants to be in control, they need to try something new. I'm going to hold off of the question about toddlers being jealous of the other sibling, because again, sibling, um, to give you a short answer to your question, definitely. I mean, when a child is sort of displaced in his place by another sibling, it can obviously cause jealousy. But coming back to our question on understanding misbehavior, so again, if the question is jealousy of the other sibling, it might be related to attention seeking, then definitely. So here are some of the reasons for misbehavior and just really short guidance techniques. Wanting to belong, to get attention, lack of confidence, does not feel well, upset by changes. So I think we mentioned many of these, right? That upset by changes. So for example, if we have a child which does not transition well, which doesn't, who doesn't like new things, predictable routines, reassurance, attention, planning ahead, these things can really help. And these are all part of discipline, right? Because again, they are proactive. Uh, Disappointment and frustration. So often children may misbehave because they simply don't get what they want. And, in that situation, we really need to teach them and model coping skills ourselves. They may feel unloved or ignored. They may have new situations, insecurity, imitation. So again, if the child is raising their temper or throwing a tantrum, and we raise our voice, to talk to them, obviously, what is the likely outcome going to be? We are modeling for them how to behave, right? So the idea is that if they're imitating us and misbehaving, we really need to manage ourselves and be mindful of the kind of role modeling we're doing for them. And also, again, effective use of TV and internet plays a huge role in this, because again, they may be imitating something that they see on TV. I think it was the last series where we did talk quite a bit about the impact of media on children. Testing limits. So again, it's completely developmentally appropriate for children as they grow to test limits. In other words, to see how serious parents are about what they say. And the idea, the way we can best address this is obviously by being firm and consistent about important things, right? So, for example, if the rule in the house is, no going out with friends on weeknights, and a preteen or a teenager is continuously testing those limits by asking them, there are two things here. One is obviously in the short term, we need to be consistent about enforcing the rules. And secondly, we need to also recognize that rules need to change as children grow and develop. Many of us, me included, are really blindsided by how fast children grow. So things that worked, 5 years ago, may not be working today. And the idea is that, there's never a dull moment in parenting because things keep changing. The minute you get used to having a toddler, they're no longer a toddler. They could also be misbehaving to stand up for self. which again, the idea is that that's a really positive reason, and we need to guide them how to discuss ideas respectfully and not use their hands and not lose it, right? And because sometimes they misbehave because it works. So, for example, if the way they can get candy is by throwing a tantrum in the supermarket, and the parent gives in the short term, what we have trained the child to do is to throw tantrums in the supermarket because we have shown them that it works. And sometimes children misbehave because there is chaos in the environment, which is, many of us will notice that children, especially younger children, tend to misbehave a lot when we are busy. This is a very, very common experience of parents, that, the times when we need them most to cooperate, that's the time they will, quote unquote, act up, right? And the idea to, what to recognize in that is, again, that children need routine, they need security, they need stability. And if we know that there is going to be a time of upheaval, or, say if there's a wedding in the house, or somebody is not well, or there's something major going on, to actually talk it through with the children as much as we can before. I hope I know this slide was really helpful to me. So hopefully, it gives us some idea if we actually take just a brief moment to think about it. Why are they misbehaving? Then hopefully we can make appropriate decisions. Now we're going to be talking about some discipline strategies. And I have 4 here. I'm not sure if we get through all of them, but let's see how we do. And if we don't, that's fine. We can, inshallah, continue next week as well. So the first and foremost thing is family meetings. And why this is a discipline strategy, because again, when we think of punishment or discipline, we're so used to thinking in hindsight. But family meetings are actually an unbelievably great way to prevent a lot of misbehavior. I try to play them to sleep and delay bedtime by 10 minutes or so. I'm not sure if that's the question. They're tired and misbehave, so you want to put them to bed, but they don't want to go, so you throw a tantrum. What do you do? So when we talk about quiet time and time out, that may become a little bit clearer. So basically the idea is that, for that you need to, again, family meetings are, wonderful ways to discuss how to prevent a lot of things. So for example, if something is consistently happening, for example, they are consistently not going to bed at a reasonable time, and they know that they're tired and it's hard for them to wind up. Okay. So family meetings are basically a good training ground for learning how to negotiate and live together. They're used to establish, explain, and clarify family ground rules. So it's best, by the way, to have rules that everyone can live by. So again, the meetings and the rules will work best if everyone, including the parents, are following the same rules. So for example, if the family has, problem with put downs, for example, the siblings are, talking in a way to each other or to others, which is not. Unmute. The way to frame the rule is that this family, or all of us together, and obviously for the parents to be the first ones to model and follow that rule. It's a really good idea you can have both proactive rules and reactive rules. What that means is, proactive rules simply means that these are things which haven't become a big issue yet. So, this would be like values. So for example, when you are training your child to pray, a very common and effective family rule is to have no salat before, no dinner before salat, or dinner only after salat, right? So that would be a proactive rule. It's not a problem yet. Children are growing up, they're starting to pray, and they are, you need to start good habits. So that would be an example of a proactive rule. A reactive rule is that, something is an issue and we need to discuss it and we need to figure out as a family together what to do about it. So again, for example, bedtime. If bedtime is an issue, you know, uh, certainly family meetings would be a great time to have a discussion about that. One of the things that happens in family life, in couples, I mean, in all sorts of relationships, is that we tend to deal with bigger issues when there is a triggered event. So, for example, we're dealing with the bedtime issue when the bedtime is there and the children are misbehaving. Okay. The idea for a really great way to circumvent that is actually to discuss it when it's not bedtime. So for example, in the context of a family meeting, to bring the subject up when everyone is calm, when people are not reactivated because of what's going on. What age would you start the family meeting? We've always had family meetings since the kids were about 4, I would say. And, if the oldest is 4, they can certainly start. And even, the younger ones, it's a really great way for them to be involved in it by just sitting, you know. So in the family meetings, do you open up the discussion for everyone to say what the problem they want to discuss, or is it the parents only who support the problem? No, definitely. So again, the next slide will explain that. And again, family meetings are a really great way to talk about values, about family vision, or what do we want this family to stand for? What are some, and obviously these discussions change and grow as children grow older. But again, what are some of the great things that you like about this family? What would you see different? Structure. Let's talk a little bit about structure. Again, the idea, the most effective family meetings are when they are regular, that is, weekly, or at the most bi-weekly, which is, bi-monthly, which is every 2 weeks, right? And, a really important point is that the thing that parents notice immediately when they start having family meetings, and this is, I can almost pretty much guarantee that this will happen because it's so common, that when you start having family meetings, things really start going well. So you'll notice a lot less conflict. You will notice calmer, more organized family life. That is just pretty much universal experience. Okay. Then what happens is that you think, great, things are going so well that we don't really need family meetings, right? And you stop doing that. And lo and behold, what happens is that they actually, slowly get back to the way things are. So it's really important to remember that the reason why things are working really well is because you are having family meetings. That's what, keeping it good. So, the challenge is to keep at it even when things are good, which is a challenge because obviously all of us have, busy lives, right? But again, and sometimes there may be no problem to talk about, and it doesn't, the idea of family meetings is not only to discuss problems. So we'll talk about the content in the next slide, but let's just go through this. Invite everyone to add to the agenda. So what I used to do when the kids were young is actually have like a sheet of paper with agenda for family meeting in a public place. Like for most people, that's the kitchen fridge or the family notice board or something like that, right? And, very often when my kids were having a really hard time with one of their siblings or something that they didn't like that the parents did or whatever, they would actually go and write on the agenda that this is what we want to discuss, okay? Which is a really great thing because it gives ownership to everyone. It's certainly not something that you're imposing on the children. It is a family issue, number one. And secondly, it really teaches them to manage conflict themselves. Because if something is already on the agenda, they don't need to discuss it right there and then. They can actually, put it aside to discuss at the family meeting. And same thing for parents. I mean, I cannot really, we should probably have done a whole one session just on family meetings. That's how strongly I believe in them. It's obviously a good idea to establish ground rules. So, for example, meeting time, what time you're going to meet, where, and then have some just basic rules of how the meeting runs. One person speaks at a time, listen to others, no put down. And involving everyone means that you basically rotate. So we used to actually rotate who would chair the meeting and who would take notes. Like, obviously you need to keep minutes of the meeting, just like in a regular meeting. So, and that's really important because when you do that, things that you decide, people remember them differently for sure. So it's a good idea to write down what was decided and discussed and then to follow it up next time. Now, all this sounds like a lot of work, right? But again, try it. It shouldn't take more than half an hour. I think the most effective meetings are short. They do not have to go on for an hour, for hours. For young children, definitely, half an hour is the maximum. And it will be awkward at first for sure. And if your kids are older and you're starting this, like if they're preteens or teens, be prepared for some eye rolls and whatever and all that, right? That's okay. Like I always think, that children need to do what children will do and parents need to do what parents will do, right? The way we parent should not be determined on whether the children like it in the short term or not. Very few kids are going to rally around and say, wow, this is a fantastic idea. Like, I'm sure children like that exist. I've never seen them, but so don't expect enthusiasm, especially from preteen. Like little children, very likely to love them, right? Older children, not so much. But again, they eventually, when we keep at it, because again, we need to understand that preteens and teens, they do need to keep up their cool behavior. And, one of the things is that they to enthusiastically support what a parent is doing is asking a lot from a teen. So, that's not, that shouldn't really stop us. The content of the meeting. So again, this is, something that works well. Obviously, you open with a short dua, which again should rotate. Like different people should choose it and different, read it. And then we always start with what is working. So what's going well. And what we used to do was actually everyone had to pick somebody else and say something that they appreciated about them. And, so the idea is that they get used to, again, noticing what is going well. And when you do that, obviously, it builds bonding, it builds the whole atmosphere. And they need to actually, because often siblings, as they grow, they might be at a stage where they are continuously complaining about the other, right? And when you actually begin to when they know that they have to say one thing that they appreciate about the other person, again, they are looking at the week in a very different way. So hard to involve other adults. That is a real issue. I cannot deny that. But the idea is, again, we can do our best, right? So let's try it. Let's see what works. And again, we need to have, would you involve other extended family members living in the same house? I would. I mean, if it's a family meeting, I'm not really sure actually about that one. That's a very good question. I think it depends. if it's easy enough and if they are amenable to it, definitely. But again, when we're talking about in-laws and, older people, it really depends on the relationship and it depends on many things. But I would definitely at least start with the children and with the parents, right? That's easier than, like ideally, yes, invite everyone. Um, and if there's pushback, then don't let that stop you. I guess that would be my answer to that. Um, Yes, it is essential to involve everyone, but the thing is that sometimes I'm really hesitant to make such strong guidelines when we can only influence our own behavior, right? And what happens when we actually put conditions which are not in our control, um, is that it stops us in the short term. And it makes us really unhappy because there's nothing we can do about it, right? So if I'm told that, what, even say my husband or my in-laws or whoever I'm living with is not interested and they're pushing back, now I have two options. One is say, it's not going to work anyway, and what's the point, and feel miserable about it. Okay. And, the other option is, what do I have control over? I can invite everyone, number one. I can certainly encourage my children to be there, and I can be there. Now, when my spouse and the other members of the family see that it's working well, that there is an increase in positive behavior in the house, and that there is a decrease in negativity, people may um, people may follow. Do parents put their problems too, or is it all related to children's problems? That's a good question. If it is a family problem, in other words, scheduling, you know, um, scheduling or talking about things which involve everyone, then everything should be on the table, right? If it is something specifically which is to do with the couple relationship, then that's not an appropriate place, because I also recommend that couples have their own meetings, uh, which are, related to um, to their issues. Because obviously, if you and your spouse, or my spouse and I cannot agree on a certain matter, it would not be appropriate to bring that to a family meeting, because that is a personal problem. Um, so again, we start with what is working, then go on to what needs to be fixed. In other words, what are some of the issues we are having? And it's a really good idea to ask for suggestions from the children, because what is really surprising is how forthcoming children can be when it is done in a way like this. So I remember, once I cannot even remember the issue, but I actually asked the kids, what do you think could be the consequence for this behavior, because it's causing a problem. And the thing they came up with was so much more than I would have given them, that I was actually surprised, and we had to actually negotiate it down. So the idea is, again, when the roles change, when children are actually given the respect and the the ownership of making the family work, they really do step up to the issue, to the plate. And this is a really good time to also talk about things that we can do together. So, for example, if you have a common a ritual, for example, or a tradition of going out as a family on a Saturday, this would be a really good time to discuss and to take turns in choosing where to go and how to spend the time, and what we could do fun thing as a family together. So again, the family meeting should not be simply a format to discuss problems and issues. It can definitely be a place where we are learning how to to make the whole family work in a better way. So moving on to making rules, because, for example, something that needs to be fixed means that it is causing a problem, and the way to proactively discuss it is obviously to make a rule. In other words, a lot of times, things are not going well because there is no ground rule. So, so let's get back to the salah. Okay. So, when children are learning to pray and we find ourselves continuously nagging them because there may not be a clear rule of when they are expected to pray. And it's a really good idea when making a rule to state it positively. So we'll go to some examples in the next slide, but also to start small, because when say things are really chaotic, we may want to make 20 rules, but the idea is to pick 2 or 3, I would say, but maximum 4 or 5 at a time to work on, and then obviously given that this will be inshallah a regular occurrence, you can keep coming back to. Right? Include children in the rule making. So if something is not working, it's a good idea to ask the children, what do you think would make it work? And this actually has so many benefits because it actually builds their own forward thinking skills. It is really a really very useful tool. We also need to check for understanding that they actually understand what is being required out of them. So, the idea is that the children should repeat it back to you. Then we need to write them down so that everyone remembers what was discussed, and to discuss consequences for now. So some of the common family rules are about, safety and supervision, which, a positively stated rule would be answer door only when adults present. So now, when I'm talking about positively stated, it means that the rule should be what to do rather than what to do. And sometimes it's much less, and sometimes it's much more challenging than at other times. So can I give examples of consequences? Yes, we will inshallah not go to get to those today, obviously, because we are out of time. But, obviously consequences are a huge thing, and we will inshallah discuss them next time. So violence-free homes, again, notice how that is stated in a way, it doesn't say don't hit or don't abuse. It is a violence-free home, which means, that everyone should be free from another person's tongue and hands, for example, right? So keep your hands and feet to yourself. We could have rules about hygiene and self-care, which means wash hands before meals. Obviously, we could extend that to include all the Islamic rules about eating, how to start, how to finish, bismillah, all those things can be inside. So again, remember that all of these are proactive, right? We're not waiting for the child to slip. We're actually encouraging to build a kind of family that we want to see. Akhlaq, pleasant tone of voice, and I hesitated a little bit to put that because again, a child may not know what a pleasant tone of voice is. So this would be something that would need to be discussed. What is a pleasant, and again, it's much better to do it in the form of a conversation than just to tell the child be polite or be nice, or that's not nice, because that's really not giving the child too much information. And about being, again, salat before. So, these are just obviously some examples to get us started. And if you're dealing with some specific thing, then obviously you are going to be dealing with those, So I think next time, inshallah, we will start with time out and with natural and logical consequences and the 6-step method. It's actually quite a bit, and I recognize that. But I did want to give, as many strategies in this course as possible. So just the last few questions. How would you discuss a pleasant tone of voice? So I would, ask the child to begin with. I would ask the child what do you think I mean by a pleasant tone of voice? Would it be loud? Would it be soft? What would the words be? So, indoor voice and outdoor voice, again, that, would be something that you would check for understanding if they understand that. Big boy voice, I somehow hesitate to use that for many reasons. Again, the idea that small boys whine and big boys don't whine, the whole idea about, I don't know, I have issues with that. Okay. Why is time out not a punishment? Can we discuss that next time, inshallah? Because it really depends. I mean, timeout can be a punishment, but the way we are going to talk about timeout is, hopefully a very different way of talking about timeout, and we will see why it can be used effectively. And the reason why I did pick it is because it is so very common, right? I mean, it's almost the standard go-to for many parents of young children is the timeout. My 2-year-old becomes a bit violent towards the 2-month-old sibling recently and to her older sister. What is not effective? What is most effective discipline for this, as distraction techniques do not always work? Often you resort to saying, if you be good, you will get a treat, but this is not good to do repeatedly. You are very right that it is not good to do that repeatedly, because you do not want children to behave just because they're going to get something, because that is likely to keep escalating. The treat bit, I mean. Many things can work in this. First of all is, again, a 2-year-old, very, very common that when a new baby is born, that the children will start, the child who is being displaced, quote unquote, is going to start, acting up. Extremely common, and it really has to do with attention. So, one of the most effective ways to deal with that is actually to give the 2-year-old attention apart from the baby. Now, I really recognize that this is not an easy thing to do, right? But if at all you can, at some point when the baby is sleeping or something, you need to have a one-on-one time with your 2-year-old. And, sometimes what parents do is simply make the older child a caregiver to the younger child. And that's the only, which can work sometimes. But I think what is more effective is to give the child individual attention, not anything to do with the younger ones, right? So that their own needs for attention and affection and all those things are being met. Once you've done that, then you can also incorporate some caring behavior into the younger ones, right? And that's what worked for me. It's all about them being replaced and insecure. Definitely, that's what it is for the vast majority of time. I mean, I remember my older son. When he used to actually go to see somebody who had had a baby, I guess he could still remember the time when he was displaced, because he was still commiserate with the older one who had had a new sibling and said, poor thing now, he's no longer the sole king of the castle, so to speak. So thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully this was a useful session, and inshallah we will see you all next week. And looking forward to hearing back on how well things are working. I will also share the last slide with you again, which is if you need to get in touch with me, please do. I'm trying to post regular blogs about things that we're talking about. Hopefully, if I can if I can get that done, maybe I will do one about family meetings this week. So look out for that. Thank you, and